Wars prequels have undergone one of the most fascinating reevaluations in cinematic history. Before the Disney era, these films were widely mocked and viewed as a massive disappointment compared to the original trilogy. Though, over the last decade, something remarkable has happened. The Star Wars fandom has almost completely flipped its perspective on these films. Several factors have contributed to this shift. One major factor is generational. The kids who grew up on these films now have a voice in the Star Wars fandom, gaining a platform to express their admiration for this trilogy. By doing this, they have shaken the once dominant narrative. Another factor is the dissatisfaction with Disney's approach to this franchise. Disillusioned with Disney's overly corporate, risk-averse approach, fans have come to appreciate George Lucas's ambition and passion in the prequels, even if the execution was flawed and uneven. My introduction to Star Wars came between the 10-year gap of the release of Revenge of the Sith and The Force Awakens. I was shown the original trilogy first, and, like many, was influenced by the prevailing opinions to disregard the prequels as inferior. At the time, I found The Phantom Menace boring, Attack of the Clones cringeworthy, though I secretly enjoyed Revenge of the Sith. Growing up with this perspective, I didn't give the prequels much thought until recent years, when the conversation around them began to change. I also realized something else. Despite my opinions, I had never rewatched the prequels back-to-back in many years. Curious to see how they hold up, and determined to approach them without bias, I decided to revisit the prequel trilogy with a new set of fresh eyes. And the conclusion I came to is that even though I disagree with many of the storytelling choices Lucas made with these films, I can respect the fact that he successfully told the story he wanted to tell without any outside interference. Something that is incredibly rare in today's film industry. That creative independence, for better or worse, gives the prequels a unique voice and identity that is hard to ignore even decades later. One of the most striking aspects of this creative freedom is how it allowed Lucas to reimagine the Star Wars universe on a grander scale, diverging from the aesthetic and tone of the original trilogy. This is especially evident in The Phantom Menace, which boldly establishes a new visual and thematic direction for the series. Aesthetically, The Phantom Menace feels like the polar opposite to the original trilogy. Gone are the grimy, lived-in sets that defined the galaxy far, far away, replaced by polished and sterile environments, such as the Grand Senate Chambers and the Royal Palace of Naboo. The character dynamics also shift dramatically. Instead of following scoundrels, farm boys, hermits, and other misfits, this film centers on politicians like chancellors, queens, and senators, alongside the powerful monk-like Jedi. It's a bold choice that reflects the Republic at its height, a time of prosperity and order that contrasts sharply with the rebellion and the chaos of the Empire in the original trilogy. I still personally prefer the lived-in, grimy aesthetic of the original trilogy. Again, that was the Star Wars I was introduced to, so I'm probably biased in that aspect. Though, even rewatching this as an adult, I can still say that this film has major pacing issues. I still find myself bored watching scenes of our characters delivering stilted dialogue in lifeless CGI rooms, talking about treaties and the Trade Federation. This film definitely has late 90s CGI in it. And because of that, this is still probably the ugliest Star Wars movie. There are a few decent shots to be found in this film, though. Another aspect that really doesn't work for me in this film is its juvenile humor. I know Star Wars is ultimately geared towards children, but there is no reason why scenes in a Star Wars movie should be borderline unwatchable for its adult audience. I'm not going to dwell on Jar Jar, but his character is a very clear failed attempt to appeal to children. I'm also not in love with the decision to make Anakin Skywalker a child. I would have preferred if he had been introduced at the same age as Luke in A New Hope, with this film planting the seeds for his path in becoming Darth Vader. I understand George Lucas wanted to show the audience that people aren't born evil, and that even the most cold and ruthless figures were once innocent children. While I can respect this approach now, I feel that planting the seeds of Anakin's darker tendencies in this film would have made his ultimate transformation feel more earned and a lot less rushed. That being said, I want to be clear that this critique is not a knock on Jake Lloyd. It's important to remember that he was a literal child doing his best with the material he was given. The Star Wars fandom's treatment of him was, and still is, absolutely embarrassing and appalling, bullying him to the point where he quit acting and leaving him with lasting trauma that he is still grappling with to this day. This is unfortunately something the Star Wars fandom has done to many other actors, such as Ahmed Best and Kelly Marie Tran. I don't want to sound preachy, but this childish behavior has to stop. At the end of the day, these are just people doing their job, and no one deserves this kind of treatment, simply for playing a role. That said, this film does a fantastic job in planting the seeds for Palpatine's rise to power. Watching him manipulate the Republic to replace the Chancellor and positioning himself as the ideal successor, showing his methodical long-term strategy to dismantle democracy from within. These moments are subtle, but effective, showcasing how Palpatine uses this system he intends to destroy to consolidate absolute power. It's a chilling and scarily realistic portrayal of political manipulation. This is easily one of the film's strongest aspects. Duel of the Fates stands as one of the most iconic moments in the entire Star Wars saga. On the surface, it's a thrilling lightsaber battle, with stunning choreography and John Williams' unforgettable score, elevating this scene to near perfection. However, what makes this scene truly great is its deeper thematic significance. This duel doesn't just determine who lives or dies, it determines the fate of Anakin Skywalker, and by extension, the rest of the galaxy. Qui-Gon's death is a pivotal moment because if he had lived, he could have provided Anakin with the father figure he desperately needed, someone who would have understood the boy's struggles and challenged the rigid and dogmatic Jedi Order. Without Qui-Gon's guidance, Anakin is left vulnerable to both the Jedi's inflexible teachings and Palpatine's manipulations. This tragic moment sets the stage for Anakin's ultimate downfall, making Duel of the Fates one of the most meaningful sequences in the entire Star Wars saga. Despite of the brilliance of Duel of the Fates, I think the final act of this film is overstuffed. Constantly jumping around from set piece to set piece. Rewatching this film, I got so frustrated because it would cut away from the Duel of the Fates sequence to another sequence that I was far less invested in. I also don't like how many of the victories happen due to carelessness. It undermines any tension or stakes, making these moments feel like contrived resolutions rather than meaningful triumphs. Even though the Clone Wars retconned this, I dislike how Darth Maul seemingly dies here. On the surface, he was such a badass character, and I would have loved to see more of him, but if he had lived, he also would have served as a constant villain in this series, which is a problem that this trilogy suffers from. This film is still a mixed bag to me. Even though there are gasps of brilliance, such as the Duel of Fate sequence, this film is still chock-filled with childish humor and poor pacing. I do respect this film's ambition, but its execution keeps it away from true greatness. Attack of the Clones improves upon some aspects of its predecessor, while regressing in others. The pacing is notably better, making it more entertaining on the surface. There are fewer scenes weighed down by wooden dialogue in poorly animated locations, which makes it feel slightly more polished in presentation, though the dialogue here is definitely worse. George Lucas is a once-in-a-generation genius world builder, among the likes of J.R.R. Tolkien and Frank Herbert. Though, when it comes to writing dialogue that is natural and humanistic, he struggles with this, and that flaw is especially shown in this film. This film has some of the worst dialogue I have ever heard in a major blockbuster. The backbone of this film is the budding romance between Anakin and Padme, and I just can't buy their romance, because I can't see why Padme would fall for this creep. Hayden Christensen's performance is one of the most divisive aspects of this trilogy, still to this day. While I don't believe he was miscast, the script does him no favors. That said, he does have some standout moments here. The scene where Anakin finds his mother beaten and dying in Tusken Raider captivity is genuinely moving. She dies in his arms, and this causes Anakin to savagely massacre the Tusken Raiders. This pivotal moment also establishes Anakin's obsession with preventing the death of loved ones, which becomes central to his inevitable downfall. Unfortunately, this powerful moment is undermined by a subsequent scene in which Anakin practically throws a temper tantrum, draining all emotional weight and maturity of the previous scene. Ewan McGregor truly comes into his own as Obi-Wan Kenobi in this film, fully stepping into the shoes of the great Sir Alec Guinness. McGregor perfectly balances wit, gravitas, and charm, all aspects that are essential to this character. His comedic moment with the Death Sticks alien is also genuinely hilarious. I also enjoy the banter between him and Anakin in this film, even though these scenes are few and far between. Also, the film's villain, Count Dooku, offers a fascinating lens into the consequences of the Jedi Order's dogmatic practices, as he himself is a fallen Jedi. Sir Christopher Lee delivers a commanding performance, bringing gravitas to the role of Dooku. However, the character is underutilized, as he only appears halfway through this film and receives minimal screen time. His status as Qui-Gon's former master is intriguing, but feels like a missed opportunity for richer storytelling. It's also puzzling why Dooku wasn't even mentioned in The Phantom Menace, as his connection to Qui-Gon could have added emotional stakes and complexity to the story. The Jedi arena fight is entertaining, but a little overwhelming. The sheer amount of action on screen makes it difficult to follow everything, leaving the sequence feeling chaotic rather than exhilarating. Also, the final lightsaber fight with Dooku is disappointing, especially compared to that of Duel of the Fates. Also, Yoda having a lightsaber is just goofy to me. I rewatched this film with my dad, and I believe he put it perfectly. It looks like Dooku is fighting a Muppet. A CGI Muppet, but still. This film does have a so bad it's funny quality that The Phantom Menace didn't really possess. This isn't really a plus for this film, but it does make it more entertaining than The Phantom Menace. The memes are also, of course, hilarious, adding to the so bad it's good quality. Overall, I see this film as on the same tier as The Phantom Menace. They both have their pros and cons, and I can't really decide which one is superior or worse, depending on how you look at it. The Phantom Menace is probably a better made movie, but Attack of the Clones is more entertaining, I guess. Let's get this out of the way. Revenge of the Sith is by far the best of the prequel trilogy. Does it rise to the level of being the best Star Wars movie? No. That title still belongs to The Empire Strikes Back. However, this film stands out in its own right, by bringing the prequel trilogy to a dramatic, emotional, and visually stunning conclusion, though it still has some of its flaws, which I will address later. This film successfully addresses many of the overarching issues that plagued its predecessors. From the opening scene alone, it is evident that the visual effects in Revenge of the Sith are miles ahead of its predecessor. While the CGI still lacks the tangible quality of practical effects, it still feels far more polished and believable. The dialogue still isn't great. Far from that, in fact. Certain scenes, such as this conversation between Anakin and Padme, is still pretty cringeworthy. But this is by far the worst of it, and it only takes up one scene. The main reason why Revenge of the Sith stands out as the best of the prequels is in its narrative focus. Unlike its predecessors, this film buckles down and concentrates almost entirely on Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader. While the execution of his descent feels rushed, the streamlined storytelling allows the film to avoid many of the distractions that bogged down the previous entries, such as the overly dull political subplots. By honing in on Anakin's journey, the film achieves a sense of clarity and emotional resonance that the other prequels often lacked. My main issue with this film is the execution of Anakin's transformation. Anakin goes from demanding Windu not to kill Palpatine, claiming it's against the Jedi Code, to murdering children in a matter of hours. This is honestly a problem with the trilogy as a whole, not just this film. The first film had him as a child incapable of doing any great harm, and Clones had him as a whiny brat who only had one really solid scene showing off his descent into darkness, leaving this film to rush his transformation. I know many people will argue that the Clone Wars series helps address these issues by fleshing out Anakin's transformation in greater detail. While I agree that the show does a fantastic job of adding depth to this character transformation, it doesn't absolve the films of their responsibility to make his fall to the dark side believable on its own merit. The prequel trilogy itself should have done the narrative heavy lifting to properly establish Anakin's descent. The fact that viewers need to watch an entire TV series to gain a firm understanding of Anakin's transformation is honestly frustrating. A film trilogy of this scale and importance should stand out on its own, and relying on supplementary material to fix its shortcomings feels like a cop-out. While the Clone Wars series enriches the stories, it shouldn't be required viewing for understanding the most pivotal arc of the Star Wars saga. Once Anakin fully assumes the role of Darth Vader, this film shifts into high gear. The Order 66 sequence is one of the most beautifully tragic moments in the entire Star Wars saga. It masterfully conveys the weight of betrayal and the loss as the Jedi, caught completely off guard, are systematically wiped out by the clones they trusted. One of the standout moments in this sequence is the hauntingly composed shot of Ki-Adi-Mundi, I probably butchered his name, leading his troops into battle, only to have them stop abruptly and turn their blasters on him. The sudden betrayal, combined with the visual composition and John Williams' heart-wrenching score, makes this scene both devastating and unforgettable. It's a testament to the film's ability to deliver emotional resonance and gravitas when it truly matters. The duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan on Mustafar is definitely a lot to take in. The dialogue leading up to the fight is undeniably stilted, but the sheer volume of memes that have come from this scene makes it oddly enjoyable in retrospect. The fight itself is definitely impressive. You can tell that Ewan and Hayden put hours and hours into the choreography, but I do believe it goes on for a little too long. After the now legendary and endlessly memeable high ground moment, this film delivers what is easily the best acted scene in the entire trilogy. Ewan McGregor gives a heartbreaking monologue, pouring every ounce of Obi-Wan's grief, anger, and devastation into his lines. Meanwhile, Hayden Christensen conveys sheer pain and rage, groaning in agony as Anakin's body and soul are consumed by the raging fires on Mustafar. I find it deeply poetic that the Skywalker twins are born almost simultaneously with Anakin's metaphorical death and Darth Vader's metaphorical birth.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
This moment represents the simultaneous end of one era and the beginning of another. With the birth of Luke and Leia, there's a glimmer of hope amongst the tragedy, symbolizing that even in the darkest moments, the seeds of redemption and a brighter future can emerge. Padme's death, which is attributed to a broken heart, initially feels clunky due to the lack of a proper medical explanation. However, considering the immense psychological toll of Anakin's portrayal, the destruction of the Republic, which she had fought tooth and nail her entire life to preserve, only for her husband to destroy it, and the physical stress of childbirth, her death feels more believable in hindsight. Finally seeing Darth Vader in the suit and hearing the iconic James Earl Jones is certainly a glorious moment. It is the culmination of this entire trilogy. However, the impact of this scene gets deflated in the now infamously campy that feels more suited to a Saturday morning cartoon, rather than a tragic final metaphorical nail in Anakin's coffin. That said, the composition of this shot is fantastic. Vader, positioned at the forefront, screams in pure anguish, while Palpatine lurks in the background, smiling with satisfaction. This visual juxtaposition perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of Anakin's fall, his pain and loss contrasted with Palpatine's triumph and manipulation. I also love the final shot of this film and the final shot of the prequel trilogy, and how it creates a perfect bridge between the prequels and the originals. The prequel trilogy as a whole is a messy and deeply flawed set of films, especially compared to the original trilogy. However, within the mess are glimpses of George Lucas's brilliance as a storyteller. These films were made with passion, and that passion is palpable in every frame. George Lucas made the movies he wanted to make, regardless whether the fans or critics liked them. While I believe filmmakers should absolutely consider their audience, I also strongly believe that they should prioritize their own creative vision above all else, free from any external pressure. Lucas exemplified this with the prequels, crafting a story that was entirely his own, and I can't help but respect that. In today's industry, we rarely see auteurs like George Lucas, visionary creators who are willing to take risks and prioritize their artistic integrity. For all their flaws, the prequels are a testament to Lucas's ambition and his willingness to chart his own course, and that's something that I believe is worth appreciating. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this latest video, and if you did, make sure to give this video a like, and if you want more content like this, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell notification so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And shout out to Dalton Kincaid and Ryan Holiday. Thanks for watching.